Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast. This show is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. Is your organization ambidextrous? It's a good question, right? It may feel at times in your company that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. Now, Dr. Zabiegalski has written a book about this concept. It's called The Rise of the Ambidextrous Organization, and you can find it on Amazon or other booksellers. Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman said of the book that Eric paints a vivid picture of how to build tomorrow's successful organizations where team members feel safe to dream, create, question the status quo, take risks, and ultimately find fulfillment. If you're ready to join the movement, this book is for you. So if you want to know if your organization is ambidextrous, and even what that means, I'll let our guest this week, Dr. Eric Zabiegalski, tell you in a conversation with myself and Mary Rudder.
What an ambidextrous organization is it's an organization that can behave in two ways at once. It can exploit the marketplace, doing what it does well for profit, market share, performance, and simultaneously explore the marketplace, innovating, learning new things, folding those into what it does. So this idea of exploitation, and defined as, doing what you do well, what you've already learned to do well, and in terms of the marketplace, and exploring and innovating at the same time. So 40 years of research on the subject of organizational ambidexterity says that exploitation drives out exploration. And what that means is that once you learn to do something well, you have a tendency to lather, rinse, repeat on those processes, and you stop learning new things. And when organizations do that, they stamp an expiration date on their foreheads.
So what you're saying is you have to have a continuous improvement mindset. How do we do what we're doing better, more, or something along those lines?
An ambidextrous organization is also code for a learning organization. To be able to do both of these things simultaneously, and there are some companies that do them very well, is difficult because it's kind of a left brain exercise and a right brain exercise. And sometimes those two things clash. Let's take the term learning organization. Even that term, or, organizational learning, even that term is kind of antithetical because organizing denotes separating things into, like groups and grouping things, separating things. And learning denotes opening up the aperture, being divergent in your thinking, learning everything you can. So even those two words, organization and learning, are kind of disparate and, antithetical opposites. Learning might be like casting a wide net out in the sea and pulling fish in. And organizing might be separating all those fish into red ones and blue ones, and two completely different activities.
You could have learning in an organization where you're just simply training your people
right.
to do their jobs, but are you talking about learning in the sense of, as to develop the people in the organization? Can you clarify that a little bit?
There's a big difference between organizational learning and a learning organization. Organizational learning is kind of a big umbrella, and I think of it in terms of getting your annual training, learning about your medical benefits, doing your, your awareness training every year, kind of sitting, kind of a static thing. But a learning organization is an active, dynamic entity that is learning in real time. So under the umbrella of organizational learning, you can have a learning organization. The two are not mutually exclusive. Now, you talked about individuals. Absolutely. You know, a learning organization I would characterize that as one that focuses on individuals, and organizational learning might be, you know, pulling everybody into the conference room once a year and giving them their, you know, annual training that they have to have, and letting them know about their benefits package.
If being a learning organization is one of the characteristics of an ambidextrous organization, what are some of the other characteristics?
So there are three different types of ambidexterity. The first type of ambidexterity is called temporal ambidexterity, and that was coined by Robert Duncan all the way back in 1975, and it has to do with switching rules. An organization will exploit the marketplace for a while, you know, doing what it's learned to do well, doing its mechanized processes, let's say, and then it'll stop and it'll explore for a short amount of time, and then it'll go back to exploiting again. So it'll switch back and forth periodically. That's temporal ambidexterity. And you could think of this as going to the summer picnic once a year, or maybe Barry-Wehmiller has an off-site retreat that it sends its people to annually, or maybe it's a conference or convention that you attend, or maybe it's the annual Christmas party. Anywhere where you're allowed to let down your hair, kind of think creatively, innovatively, not follow the, you know, structured processes that you normally do. That's temporal ambidexterity, and I think all organizations do that. Anytime they have an unstructured event where people are allowed to relax and let their hair down, they're practicing temporal ambidexterity. The next type is called structural ambidexterity. This is an organization that has a specific physical structured place where you are allowed to explore. Think about Disney Pixar with its DreamWorks factory. That might be an explorative structured place. Lockheed Martin Aviation Company, they have a skunk works department where they're working on their new technology, the, you know, new cool stuff that they're developing. Any company that has an advanced program division, that's kind of a structural ambidextrous place. The third type is called contextual ambidexterity, and I would also think of that as cultural ambidexterity. That's where being ambidextrous gets into your DNA. It's pushed all the way down to the individual level, and individuals are allowed to make their own decisions and behave somewhat autonomously as far as when they can switch. You know, some offices and some workplaces are results oriented. You know, we don't really care if you follow structured rules as far as you know, work rules, as long as you produce and you get the job done, and you're results oriented. Other organizations are more, you know, butts in seats accounting. I want to see you clocking in at 8. You don't clock out till 4. That kind of thing. And Brent, you asked, what does ambidexterity take? It takes a certain amount of courage and intestinal fortitude, I think. Also, there's something called attitude toward divergent thinking. And that is, you know, some people can have a negative attitude toward divergent thinking and divergent thinkers. And I think personally, I've done a lot of cognitive research and I'm very interested in that kind of thing, that people have a default home room that they like to mentally go to. It's either left brain or right brain. It's either the number crunching, objective spreadsheet side of the left brain, or the creative, artistic, integrator right side of the brain. And it also takes an element of safety, that you have psychological safety in your workplace. I read about something about that in Everybody Matters, that that you know that you have a safety net. You're not going to get killed off professionally, and that you're allowed to make mistakes. Yeah.
The challenge for sort of an old school manufacturing business like Barry-Wehmiller, we are very much a learning organization, and that promotes contextual ambidexterity, but it's kind of hard to move in that direction all the time. Try to figure out how to really be innovative and learning, and find the capacity to do that, because sometimes that's the problem, because you still have to deliver on your bottom line.
Yeah, and you've got to keep the factory lines going, and you have to, manufacture your bread and butter products, and yeah. And another thing that it takes, Brent and Mary, is that it takes an ability to have two different kinds of structures. So you have the vertical hierarchical kind of structure, and you also have a flat organizational structure. Think about a cross horizontal line and a vertical line. You have to have both of those structures present, and you have to be able to switch back and forth between those. And I wrote on page 9 of my book, I talk about creativity killers. There's a great article written by Teresa Amabile. I'm not sure if I pronounced her name correctly. It was called How to Kill Creativity. And some of the things that she lists as creativity killers are homogeneous teams, leaders and managers with little or no knowledge of their employees, critically and negativity bias towards new ideas, a climate of fear, an organizational ecosystem that kills creativity, lack of a safety net for mistakes, little intrinsic motivation, only monetary reward systems, lack of sharing and problem solving, lack of valuing knowledge from disparate fields. All those things are challenges, especially if you have factory processes and companies that follow very vertical structures and factory processes, like I'm sure some of the Barry-Wehmiller companies do. And, people that are very experienced and very seasoned, and they've been doing that for decades, this kind of stuff might not make sense to them.
Or they fear it. Doesn't make sense, and they don't know how, to make the switch. I mean, I think that's the hard part.
Right. Knowing when to switch and how to make the switch. Mm-hmm.
So what do you say to especially smaller organizations who, they don't have a lot of time to figure out how to do new things or to change, adapt? We all know that's kind of necessary for survival ultimately, it seems like, but how do you get them to make that change?
Yeah, I think it takes a personal connection. You hit on it. It's fear-based. The amygdala, that 3 million year old part of your brain, the brain stem, primordial brain, only knows 4 things. That that kicks in when something is different. In my field of work, I've been in defense contracting, working for the DoD for 11 years now, and very vertical, hierarchical, top-down structures. It's challenging, especially when the admirals at the Pentagon and the leadership at the top are sending letters down through the organization saying, we want innovation, we want creativity, we want to be agile. And the defense contract companies and the different programs that are doing the work, that are at the coalface, swinging the pickaxes, they are more risk averse. I hear these messages as an academic, and I read these letters, and I say, hey, these generals and admirals are giving us a clear path to be innovative and creative, let our hair down a little bit, and people are very risk averse to do it because they don't want to do anything dumb, dangerous, or different, which is a aviation term.
You have a whole chapter in the book on leadership. Let's talk about leadership in ambidextrous organizations. Ambidextrous organizations. Say that 5 times fast.
That's right.
Let's talk about leadership. What are the types of leaders in those organizations?
Brent, the best models that I found for this type of business model are the ambidextrous leadership model and the complexity leadership model, and then also the learning leader and the helping leader. The ambidextrous leadership model, and complexity both have 3 leaders. So there's sort of a shared leadership model. In the ambidextrous leadership model, you have managers who focus on the current complexity in the organization. You have leaders who focus on change and moving things forward. And you have entrepreneurs who are focused on opportunities. In the complexity leadership model, it's similar. You have an adaptive leader. They're focusing on change. You have an administrative leader. They're focusing on the current operations. I think about this leader as kind of a train conductor with a pocket watch in their hand, and they're making sure the trains are running on time. And then you have the enabling leader, and they're focusing on people, supporting the people, empowering them, clearing obstacles so that they can get things done. In my work, we talked about a minute ago, usually the administrative leader is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And you may have enabling leaders, and you have adaptive leaders. As a matter of fact, I'm sure they're present, but they're probably informal, and they're very small because in my vertical structured world, that administrative leader is, like I said, they're usually the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
One of the most important things we teach in our internal university is how to flex, how to realize that there are different styles of working and learning and being. Some people will react, some people learn in certain ways, some people don't, and it's good to know that about them when you're trying to reach them and motivate them and inspire them.
Yeah, and so diversity is a big advantage today. Cognitive diversity, generational diversity, racial diversity, experiential diversity, and all of those things should be, realized, recognized, validated, and leveraged.
I'd like to hear a little bit about what some examples of ambidextrous organizations. Tell us a little bit about some of the ones you've seen.
Sure. So Toyota is a good example of an ambidextrous organization. Toyota will do something, Toyota routinely does something called perturbation, and they will intentionally perturb their processes just to see what new learning will come out of them. So, in a sense, they will mess with themselves just to see what they can learn from it. Even if everything appears to be running smoothly, they may pick up the polishing machine, for example, that's been sitting next to the grinding machine on the factory floor for years and move it to the other side of the factory just to see how it changes the flow and operations and social dynamics of the workforce. Being able to do that is, the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just about everybody else would say, don't touch that. Everything's the polish, you grind the piece of equipment and then you take 2 steps to the right and you polish it. What the heck are you doing? Don't move that machine. You may learn that you need to put the machine back, or you may learn that that after an individual uses the grinding machine and they've got to walk over to the other side of the factory, they stop at the design office and talk to their friend who they rarely get to see because they're busy on the other side of the factory, and they have a great conversation that spurs an idea for a design change. They have, a boundary spanning conversation about my department and your department, and maybe something organic comes out of that.
What would being an ambidextrous organization mean for the people inside the organization?
One thing it would mean for them is that it would give them more of a stake in the claim of business. It would give them a greater fulfillment, a deeper sense of purpose, more autonomy, more of a feeling of ownership, even if they didn't have, even if it wasn't an ESOP company or stock option company. They would know it would be more of a family atmosphere. They would feel as if that company was also theirs. They would be, in a sense, they would be part of a larger group, but they would also be a company of one. I heard a story once about a heart surgeon who was sitting in a waiting room to talk to another doctor, and who I think was also a heart surgeon. And there was a gentleman in there who was a janitor who was mopping the floor, first sweeping the floor, and then mopping the floor, and then just meticulously caring for the room that this other professional gentleman was sitting in, the waiting room. And he finally said he was so overwhelmed and impressed by the care that this janitor was taking in cleaning the doctor's, the other cardiologist's waiting room, that he asked him, "Why are you doing this? Why are you taking such care?" And the janitor replied back to the gentleman, he said, "Because Dr. Thompson and I, we fix hearts. That's what we do. And this room's got to be spotless."
What would you have to say to people when they're evaluating whether or not their company is an ambidextrous organization?
One of the things that has fascinated me in this journey of discovery and learning is that I discovered along the way that most organizations were operating on a language, an outdated language from before the turn of the last century, kind of an industrial revolution sort of language built on Newtonian physics. Ambidextrous organizations have upgraded that, and they are thinking in terms of concepts and processes of quantum physics and quantum mechanics. I think that we language reality into existence. So, if we're talking about Newtonian physics, we're talking about things that are linear, the visible world, laws of motion, acceleration, deceleration. If we're talking in terms of quantum physics and quantum mechanics, we're talking about weak linkages, butterfly effect, chaos theory, awareness at the lowest levels, the beyond the observable world, and then being able to scale up to the big divergent picture. I think a lot of organizations are still thinking in a turn of the last century industrial revolution kind of processes and mindset.
So someone reads your book, they close the book. What do they do first?
If they're an employee, maybe they rethink the organization that they work for, and they're faced with a tough decision about going to an organization that would allow them to actually achieve intrinsic motivation and be part of the organization. I read in Everybody Matters, and I've heard it before, I believe it, that we're often hired for our hands, but we would gladly give our hearts and our heads if we were only asked. As a matter of fact, we probably long and yearn to do that, but a lot of times we're told to, sit in your cube or do what we wanted you to do. So maybe, maybe they would have a tough decision to make then, Mary, about if this is the type of organization that they really want to work for. If they were an owner, it would cause them to rethink their processes and really do some deep reflection about the type of organization that they have built and that they want to build. Culture is huge. I forgot who said it. Maybe it was Bennis, who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Edgar Schein, the cultural researcher who coined the phrase corporate culture, says that perhaps the single most important thing a leader does for their organization is they set the culture. I would add that if they don't do that, you're going to get one anyway, and you may not like or even understand what you have. So if you're a CEO and a leader of an organization, what are you going to do after you read this book? You're going to take an assessment and accounting of what you have and what you want, and if it really aligns with what your vision was and what you wanted to build. If you're an employee, maybe you'll jump up in the air and kick your heels and say, I'm in the right place. Or maybe you'll say, I'm going to take steps to change this and see if I can make it into what I want. Or maybe I'm going to move on and look for another organization.
Thanks for listening to the Everybody Matters podcast. Again, you can find Dr. Eric Zabiegalski's book, The Rise of the Ambidextrous Organization, on Amazon or in other booksellers. If you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Ross Zodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. And for updates on the book, this podcast, and a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. And don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.